Welcome, everybody. We're so happy to have you here in our session. For the next 30 minutes, we're going to talk about the joy and the flexibility that remote work can bring. We'll also talk about what we've learned over the last 2 years about remote work and about ourselves and what we do to make it work for us. Please introduce yourself in the comments and let us know where you're joining from. Post any questions in the Q&A box. We'll do our best to answer them while we're live. And so about me, my name is Ronke Babajide. I've been working in tech for over 22 years. 15 of those years, I've worked in pre-sales as a sales engineer or solutions engineer, depending on what company I was in. And most recently, I worked at VMware as a lead solution engineer for cybersecurity. So Stephannie, over to you. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you. So yeah, I'm Stephannie. My background is in finance and investing, and I have been with Workday for a year and a half. I am a principal on the Workday Ventures team, where we are investing in startups that are synergistic with Workday's strategy. I moved to San Francisco from New York mid-pandemic. I started this job remotely mid-pandemic, so this is a topic that's important to me, and I'm excited to dive in. I will pass it over to Stephannie.
Hello, everyone. My name is Stephannie Ulloa, and I started my career in tech a little bit more than 10 years ago with software development, and then started to dig in networking and telecommunications. I'm based out of Costa Rica, and I started my current role as the manager of solutions engineering at VMware, actually remotely as well, when just the pandemic was starting. So it's very exciting for me to be part of this amazing panel and also be able to share stories and so many things that I've learned and went through this unique process. Now, passing over to Rachel.
Rachel, you're on mute. Sorry.
I promised I wouldn't do that. My name is Rachel Cinnamon. I currently work for Staples in the corporate headquarters in Framingham, Massachusetts, but I have been remote since the pandemic started. I actually started the role I'm in now, project manager of portfolio strategy and analytics, during the pandemic. I'd never met any of my colleagues or my boss in person. So it's been like really exciting. I love being among other people who've had similar experiences. And before I was with Staples, I worked for General Motors, and part of the time I was there, I was remote as well. So I feel I have a couple of different remote experiences, and I am really excited to be here with you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you for sharing. And you said you have a some remote working experience, and I would say the same about myself. When the pandemic started, I did actually consider myself a veteran of remote working. I was completely sure I was prepared for everything that was coming. I've been working from home for over 12 years already, so I had everything at home that I needed to work comfortably from home. I have an office to myself. I have this really good 200 Mbit internet. I have my external monitor. I have a camera. I have a microphone. You name it, I had it. So we kind of seamlessly slipped into this whole pandemic shutdown, work from home situation. And me, when I say we, I mean me and my husband, who's self-employed and also has his own office at home. And the transition at first was really easy for us. And in the beginning, it was actually amazing, you know, no dressing up, no commute, time to cook in the evening, just really nice all over. But then after a while, I came to realize that even though I was prepared in a situational sense and I had everything, I wasn't at all prepared emotionally for the way my work was going to change. So the remote work during the pandemic wasn't at all like the home office situation I was used to before. What I realized is that I hadn't actually been working remotely at all. I was working hybridly. When I was at home, in the office, it used to be a break or a respite from traveling, from interacting with people. It was the time when I tied up some loose ends, when I wrote emails, and when I reflected on what had happened in the previous days. So I was never working from home all the time. I was working in a hybrid between the customer sites, the airport lounges, the hotels, and my home office. And I wasn't prepared to be stuck in the same place all day doing the same thing, in front of the same screen, talking to mostly invisible people, because, you know, a lot of people, while you're presenting and talking, turn their cameras off. And then what also happened is people started filling every available slot in my calendar. There were no breaks. Every day felt very much like the last. And now my Google is talking to me. I have no clue why. I found this kind of remote work incredibly draining and increasingly boring. So because what I always loved about the job was the variety. And what I also loved was that I didn't know what was the next day was going to look like. And that all changed. And I feel that this situation, the stress and the monotony of the social distance pandemic work from home was what so many people have now come to associate with the term remote work. And a lot of them dislike it, just like I did. So I think now is really the time to remind each other that working from home, if it's done right, can mean work-life balance or work-life integration or whatever you want to call it, because there are really big benefits in terms of flexibility and time saving and so forth. So Savannah, what were your experiences with the remote working situations exactly?
Yeah, so I started at Workday in August 2020, and I didn't meet anyone on my team for almost a year. So something that's really important to me that I want to talk about is building relationships remotely. And I know we had an excellent panel this morning on networking, but I think it's interesting in this context as well. So I kind of think about it in two ways. One, kind of how to be intentional about forming new relationships. And then secondly, kind of how do we think about the depths of those relationships? So in terms of new relationships, something that I think someone else also touched on, I had a conversation with my first manager at Workday and my mentor, and she helped me come up with a list of people that I wanted to connect with. So not just people who would directly impact my role, but possibly someone I could learn something about Workday or some skills gap area that I have, or maybe someone who has a common interest as me outside of work. So I'm a big theater person. She thought of somebody else who's a big theater person. And so my list was maybe 15 to 20 people, and we kind of kept iterating on it in our early sessions. And I found that people were generally very open and excited to connect with me. On the topic of kind of creating deep and meaningful connections, you know, it's a hard one, and there's things that I really miss about in-person connection that can be challenging to replicate through Zoom, and it's kind of hard to balance Zoom fatigue and some small talk exhaustion with kind of genuinely wanting to connect. And so that said, you know, I try to be intentional about being really authentic and curious about getting to know my team beyond the day-to-day operations. And so there's a couple moments that really stand out to me and that I remember where through Zoom, someone kind of shared something with me that they're going through or followed up with me to check in on something I shared. And there were moments where, yes, we have this physical distance, but I still feel some kind of real human connection, which for me is important. And I remember when I met my manager, this same manager mentor after a year, and we met in person for the first time. She ran up to me and she gave me a hug, and she said, "I feel like I've known you for years." And I really felt the same way, having never met her in person before. And so, you know, as everything becomes more hybrid, I do look forward to getting off Zoom a bit more, but I also don't discount it as a way to really get to know people. So yeah, and I think Ronke, you had something to add on this point, and also if anyone else has stories they want to share, feel free to drop it in the chat as well.
Yeah, I do have some thoughts on you know, making connections, but I think that Rachel also had some not so good experiences, right? Working remotely initially before the pandemic.
So I did have a bit of a different experience than you did, Ronke. When I first was working remotely, I had just moved from Michigan to Boston, and my immediate team was all in person, working in downtown Detroit every day. And I was in a small apartment set up like with boxes and a laptop, working by myself every day. And I felt a little bit it felt a little bit isolating because I was the only one who was remote on my team.
Mhm.
And you know, to your earlier point about feeling like you're really set up, I had all of the equipment. A lot of my cross-functional partners were in different offices anyway, so we communicated via Zoom, or I think at the time we used Skype also. I don't know if people are using that anymore. And we had a lot of phone conversations to plan our projects. And so I thought, oh, you know, what's the difference gonna be? I'll just be sitting at a different desk in a different city, but most of my partners are away anyhow. But it did feel a bit isolating. And I felt that this time around, we were all in it together. And so it felt like a little bit more, I don't know if it was a positive experience. I wouldn't necessarily say positive experience, but it felt less isolating, if that's even, it seems like ironic, but
No, but that
No,
does
no.
make sense, I think, Rachel, right? I mean, building connections online is easier when everyone's online, because that's what I was thinking about when Savannah talked about making connections. For me, I'm an introvert, and I spend so spending this time in my safe environment, and now everyone being online gave me the opportunity to actually connect with a lot of people that I wouldn't have met before the pandemic. Now everyone was going to online events, and you know, everyone was approachable because everyone was constantly sitting in front of the computer like I was. So apart from the fact that I didn't enjoy that my days were so similar all of a sudden, I really got into this into this whole online connection thing, events thing, and I made like thousands of connection. I started a podcast, and I all of a sudden got to interview women on the other side of the globe. So this is something that I would actually see as a positive of this whole online connection, remote working thing. But there are other things around, I mean, for example, physical and mental well-being. And I think that's what Stephannie is going to talk about a little, right?
Thank you, Ronke. Something that Rachel also mentioned is that sometimes you can feel isolated. And I was just checking the chat. Several people was commenting something like, "Hey, I know someone who was an internship and started working in a not in a very last minute office." So it's very funny to see how we can grow from when we started, how we started to work. My experience is that I actually just changed my job when the pandemic was just starting. So the entire it was an overwhelming feeling at some point. You can feel isolated. And I also saw another question about how do you try to manage or get your team together when working remotely. So I have a team of 5 people, and I'm the one in Costa Rica. There are like global team. So one of the things that I can mention that it's very important is to keep the things kind of informal outside of work. Maybe in the sense of okay, let's get together, and before starting the work, actually we can start like asking things like, hey, how do you do it on a weekend? How was that? Oh, you like this thing? And, as much as you start knowing the people, knowing the team, you feel like a better connection, and it's very important. Also, it helps with the well-being. We spend long hours in the office, and sometimes it's difficult for us, and I'm guilty myself, that sometimes we don't stick to the actual time on, okay, I start at 8 and I end up at 5. That never happens in the office. So that is just one tip for the well-being. It's put yourself for mental and physical well-being. Take breaks, drink water. That's extremely important. Drink water. Sometimes you're just so focused on your work and you have your bottle just right next to you and you just forget to drink water. So that's something which is very important as well. And also, what I tell my team is good predisposition, new mentality, be aware of the flexibility that actually the remote work gives you, how much time you save, how much money you save, and take that and actually convert that into something positive that will impact into your life you will feel very productive, very settled. One of the things that worked for me as well is just to settle my workplace. I used to work in my same room, like when I slept, and then I noticed, okay, I'm sleeping and working in the same place. So this separation, I think it's very important, and also helps a lot in everything, which is your well-being. You feel productive, you feel settled, and respect the time for your lunch and breaks. I don't know, Rachel, do you have anything else to comment about well-being? I know that you were doing some major things there for physical well-being.
Oh my gosh, yes, thank you so much. So I agree with you fully. Well-being it's so important to take care of yourself so that you can be present for everything else that you need, everybody else in your life who needs you. And I found that it was important for me to exercise, because it made me feel like I was doing something for myself, and I could offer the rest of my time fully to my job and my family and my dog, who I really hope doesn't bark right now. and so I started exercising in the mornings, when normally I would have spent that time commuting to work, or putting on a lot of makeup, or getting on some high heels or something crazy like that. And I found I wanted to be intentional about how I used that additional time I had, and I used it to exercise. And having that extra time and that extra flexibility, I was able to do something I've wanted to do for a long time. I'm training to run a marathon, so I'm very excited about it. I was never like an exercise person that much before. Yeah, very much before it. And this pandemic, just knowing I had to be intentional about how I used my time and making sure I used it for something positive. I remember when I was in a rigorous MBA program while I was also working. And at the end of the program, we all talked about, what are we going to do with all this extra time we have? And you know, we used a comparison of like a glass cylinder filled with stones, and you could put water in it and fill it with any kind of liquid that you want, and you can do whatever you want with that extra space. But if you are not intentional about filling that space with something important to you and something that you want to do, then it'll get filled up by something else. Somebody else will fill it up. Some other time will fill it up. So, so really that being intentional, and Savannah, I think you hit it perfectly. We can't just run into people in the hall when we're all remote. So we have to be intentional about how we build relationships and how we keep in touch with people. And, you know, it's still important to have that connection, and we just have to do it a little bit differently. It's kind of fun to be creative that way, I think. So, yeah, I still can't believe I'm training for a marathon. And I would never have met all of you amazing people. I'm not kidding. Like, holy cow, Savannah, you live in California. Stephannie, you live in Costa Rica. Ronke, you live in Europe. I don't think I would ever have gotten an opportunity to meet you if we hadn't all had to be virtual. And it's so exciting to me. I love it.
That's awesome, Rachel. And I think that the struggle, it's real for most of us. It's not easy for all of us. We don't have the same determination to say, okay, let's do it. I'm going to do a marathon. It's not that easy. But I will say that if you reward yourself, like if you feel that you're actually making, even though there are small steps towards a big goal, I think that's very important. And not just physical, that I mean, for me, helps a lot, mind games as well. I have this small mind games that I use a couple of minutes a day, and that helps you just refreshing your mind and just forgetting about everything you have there in your mind. So that's another tip from my side. Do you have anything, Ronke?
Yeah, actually, I started blocking certain times in my calendar because, as I mentioned earlier, I had this issue that people were just filling up my calendar. So I just put in a block for a complete hour at lunchtime so I could have lunch and take a walk, for example. And I've become very intentional about stopping to work, actually, and then getting up out of my office and not staying on the computer, but going into another room and doing something else, for example. And what I also did is I regularly buy flowers that I put in a vase on my desk, and I enjoy them and they make me happy. So I think it's a lot of little things that you can actually do to make yourself feel good and you know, help against this constant barrage of meetings and things.
I think that's actually a perfect transition to some Q&A. I've been looking at some of the questions, and the first question is, how do you prevent burnout from working remotely? So I think those were a couple ones. Does anyone have anything to add?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, the burnout thing, I think a lot of is really around how you know, how you manage to set boundaries. And that has become really hard due to the remote work, because people kind of always expect you to be available. So for me, as I said, this blocking of time was so important, because if it wasn't there, then I had no chance to actually have, you know, like 5 minutes to myself. And I would really make sure that nobody took that time from me. And I had this other colleague, for example, he went for a run at lunchtime, like Rachel goes in the morning, but it didn't matter what was on the agenda, he would do his lunch run. So, and I think it's very important, you know, these boundaries.
Yeah, I also wanted to add, because I know it's something that we've talked about as a panelist group, that none of us on this panel are moms. And we also acknowledge that that's kind of a different experience that I can't really relate to. So unfortunately, don't really have stories to share there, but would anyone who has and would like to share their stories in the chat, I'm sure that would be appreciated as well, because I think probably a different type of burnout, kind of different type of work-life balance considerations as well. So
I do want to chime in here quickly, because I realize, yes, the kids thing in the remote working and pandemic situation must have been super stressful. But I also remember before the pandemic, and I said that the whole situation with the home office working and hybrid working has changed, but I had a lot of colleagues who had little kids, and for them it was actually very cool to be able to work from home, because they had, you know, when the kids were ill, they would just stay home. Or if they need, you know, if their partner wasn't available, or there was a doctor's appointment, and, you know, with this flexible way of working, that was actually really helpful when you had kids. I also don't have the personal experience, but that's what I saw, you know, also the young fathers doing, and the young mothers. So I think we have to discern between this really stressful pandemic times and oh, there's someone saying, I lean on my network to set expectations, prioritize and deliver. Yeah, I think you would have to do that.
Yeah.
And hopefully, and I can say it was this way at VMware, is that your network will be supportive. So what I did see is that in tech and in these spaces I've worked, people have become very accustomed to be flexible around people with kids, you know.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
also
And
very
really
funny. Oh, sorry,
Go ahead,
Stephannie. I was just checking Janelle in the chat saying that 2 of my sisters will drop their kids on my house thinking, oh, my sister works from home, she can do it. And that's something that I guess all of us have gone through at some point. Like some of our external, like our families or external people think like, oh, if you're from home, like practically you're doing nothing. So it's also an additional challenge to overcome when it comes to actually, okay, you need to work and focus your work and actually not being too stressful about taking another persons or another part of your life's burden in order to go there and just look for it. You can always help, of course, but I think it's part of the struggle that the moms go through, as Ronke was saying. I will say that I appreciate the lots of people are saying that it's hard to explain for a 4-year-old that it's not a playtime day. I guess they always will want to play, and it's hard to explain, right? So I think it's very interesting to see that go. And Stephannie, you had something to say.
No, I was just going to say kind of my takeaway, and I would love to spend time reading all of these stories, but kind of really around intentionality of kind of finding time in your day. And then also, just like everything in this pandemic, it's seeming like there's a lot of really hard things and a lot of really positive things.
I would like to say something around the burnout situation, because I see so many comments around that. So there's a comment just now by someone saying she's very deep into burnout now. And I just want to acknowledge that, because I think this thing with the boundaries is a big issue, especially for women who are very conditioned to say yes, when people ask favors or ask for meetings. The thing with the woman who said her sister drops off her kids, I mean, that's just so typical, because we just expect women to say yes and take care of others and other people's needs and wants. And I, for example, I mean, I said I worked for VMware. I just quit working because the whole pandemic situation with this time that filled up with meetings, I just felt I needed a break. And I just want to acknowledge that a lot of us are really drained after, these 2 years of pandemic. And I have to say that without kids, I was drained and felt I needed a break. So don't feel bad if you feel that you feel burned out. I just have to say that, just know that we are all, struggling, and that it's very human, and especially that a lot of women are struggling because they have this dual responsibility. I just wanted to chime in on that. Sorry for interrupting, Rachel. There's some questions in the Q&A still. I don't know if you have time to get into that.
Maybe we can do I guess we could do one more question, and then kind of...
I think that the two are very related, and I think that a supportive manager and a supportive company and culture is very important for this. I know that some people in part of the questions are there. How do you manage to actually feel like, okay, I'm delivering, I'm actually meeting the targets, but I'm still being asked to be there 100%, 150% of the time. So it's about, as Ronke said, set boundaries, speak up, talk to your manager one-on-one, saying, I need time for me, I'm feeling burned out. Communication, I think, it's the key. It's very important. And as Ronke said, again, just I would like to highlight this. It's okay to feel like that. I think it has happened to all of us to feel like that at some point, but communication is the key. Go ahead and extend your needs. So for some people, and that happened from someone from my team saying, okay, I have my dog and I need to take my dog at this time, which is like 5 p.m. their time. And maybe it's still like working hours, and that's it. I mean, it's fine. You can go ahead and you can come back and you can tell me, or you can go, but it's the flexibility and communication. Because if you don't communicate, what happens if the manager is looking for you and you're just not there? That can just lead to something like maybe really bad, and something about that. But if you communicate, if you tell your needs, I think the communication is the key for this.
Yes, I totally agree with you. Because so I know some people who now have to pick up their kids, and they'd say, I realize we're working on a project. I'm actually thinking of a specific situation, but it has happened more than once. And she said, I just have to step out for about an hour to pick up my daughter, and then I'll be back online and we can work via email. And that totally worked. But I agree, it was about the communication, because I might have been like, oh my gosh, what happened to her? Am I doing this all alone? So it's definitely good to have communication and to know, like, when I would feel like really burnt out, like I wasn't doing, like I didn't feel good about myself, and I wasn't feeling like I could do my job that from other like other input, like people would tell me I was doing really well. And I was like, no, I must be really terrible at this. I had to step back and say, I can't think about my job and my performance all the time. Like I have to at least give myself a mental break to not be like obsessing at 10 o'clock at night. How am I going to prepare for this 9 a.m. morning meeting? And just like a mental break that went a long way. I really think it's so different for everybody. So, so just looking out for it.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I think that's a perfect note to wrap on. I'm just keeping an eye on time here. And I know we could talk about this for a lot longer. But really appreciate also the participation from all of you. It's been really great to read your stories and what you've shared. And hope this was interesting. And yeah, I think if we're all just kind of easy on ourselves for the different, but in some ways similar feelings that we've been going through over the last couple of years.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for
Take
joining.
care of yourselves.
Thank
Be good to
you.
yourselves.
Gratitude and attitude. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Yes, Deanna, we are in this together.